And I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful speakers for tonight's event. We have our very own media literacy maven, Dr. Catherine Fry. We have our BC alumna, Marisol Gonzalez, and from CUNY Staten Island, Dr. Raquel Gates. We hope it will continue as an annual tradition of bringing together media practitioners, academics, and practitioners/academics who are working in different fields to share their expertise and their insight with you.
So my question to you is, because I just think it's interesting that you want to kind of talk about this and deal with this topic, is what do you think can be done to maybe change the negative images of females, especially African Americans, on reality television? And do you believe that positive representations will bring actual ratings to the networks? What do you think could be done?
Okay. So I have a two-part answer to your question. One, I think it's really important to have more women of color as filmmakers and TV producers and showrunners and writers. It's, you look at something like Saturday Night Live, where they didn't have any black women at all, and they'd had 2 or 3 in the past 20 years, and they'd maybe been on for a season and never got any parts, right? And to their credit, Saturday Night Live didn't just cast a black woman, they cast 2 black women writers, and that was actually more important. People didn't talk about it. It was more important than actually having just the black woman on air, right? Because having someone write for her meant that they were actually going to write sketches for her and write culturally specific sketches where she could sort of push back against sort of typical ways of representing black women, right? So I think that having more people sort of on the production side is really important. The second thing I'll say, though, is I think we also have to think about what we mean when we say negative and positive, and this is where it starts getting really tricky, especially when you talk about African American representation, because if we're going with the Cosby Show model, right, if we're going with that and we go with that sort of idea of positive representation, then the only black characters that we'd ever get to see are heterosexual doctors and lawyers who are upper middle class, right? And that's I don't know, it's kind of boring. I mean, it's and it doesn't sort of
Not relatable.
It's not relatable, and there's a limit to how rich those stories can be. I mean, I think about something which admittedly I didn't watch, but I'm sure many people have, The Wire, right? Where there's nothing, if we were to sort of check off all the boxes that would make that a positive or negative representation, right? We could argue they would be negative representations, and that would be such an overly simplistic way of talking about that show, I think. And so one of the things that I try to do a lot of in my work is really dismantle those ideas of positive versus negative, right? And I think we can always talk about the extent to which characters are simplistic and they're just sort of conventional tropes, right? If I see one more sassy black female best friend, I'm gonna go crazy, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that every time we see, let's say, a black woman on television being sexual, that she's automatically a Jezebel stereotype, right? Which is one of the things that people have thrown out about Scandal, right? And so I think that's the second part. One is having more people to sort of write and create these more sort of rich, varied depictions. And the other is for us, sort of as critics and audiences, to push back against the idea that there's an easy way of defining what's a positive character versus a negative character.
I was wondering if you could speak about just the current state of media literacy in New York, in schools, in New York City public schools, and just speak about what opportunities are out there and what if it's an expanding field, and what people who might be interested in doing that, what they how they should go about their education and in terms of research, production.
Yeah,
both.
That is a really good question, and I have so much to say, and I'll try to keep it short and in a time frame that makes sense. There's very little media literacy in the public schools, and it's only organizations like ours and other kind of related organizations that have had to literally pound the pavement, knock on doors, and get principals to listen to us and say, hey, you know what, this is what this is 21st century education that we think students need. It's very, very, very difficult to get through the DOE doors in New York City. It's really, really hard. But however, there are a number of people, and I've been included in this in the past, and I'm not doing anything about it right now, but we're trying to get something on the bill at the state Senate to make media literacy education a mandated part of the curriculum, which I have very mixed feelings about, I have to tell you, because I know how the DOE works and everything gets way watered down. But I think the important part of your question, and I will answer that, is there are a lot of people, graduate students and otherwise undergraduate students, who are becoming really interested in being media literacy educators. And we're taking note. And there's a national organization called the National Association of Media Literacy Educators. And there are a number of us who are thinking seriously about, okay, how can we start to create curricula and create programs so we can train people to be who understand a lot about media, to become educators and to like push this movement forward. And your question is so timely because we're kind of starting that at the ground level here at Brooklyn College. My hope is that we can grow a program at the graduate level where we start training people to be media literacy educators. I know that there are a number of PhD students who are starting to do dissertations on media literacy education, and they're actually like collecting data and doing research. It's a whole area that needs to expand, and I hope to be able to be doing some of that. So I would like to be one of the, one of those first scholars who starts teaching people how to do media literacy, because now I understand a lot about what the needs are and how to start doing it. There's very little in New York City. New York City is ripe for this stuff. I don't have a lot of faith in the DOE, but that's not to say that things can't change.
And then Darice.
Thank you, ladies. My question is for Dr. Gates. We've been discussing back and forth gender representations, especially in reality TV. And I wanted to know, how do you feel that that genre of television will help women of color get more work in the industry, back and front of the camera? Do you feel like now that we're being seen more?
I think that's a tricky question, right? Because I think we have this idea that the media like does these magical things to society. You know what I mean? Like if there's more black women on television, that will ... I don't know what the ... is, but what I would say is I think that having, and I don't know the composition of the crews, and that's really important, but I think about something different than reality television. I think about the Cosby Show in a different world, and the reason I'm mentioning those is because the Cosby Show was really well known for employing lots of African Americans like as PAs, doing all kinds of things, and it was sort of like almost like an internship for them. And a lot of the people who worked in pretty low-level positions on the Cosby Show went on to be writers and producers on A Different World, and then went on to be showrunners for their own shows. And so my hope would be that with reality television, and again, I'm not sure who's working on them, right? But I would hope that what you're getting are people who are actually learning hands-on the business of producing a television show and doing casting and doing production and doing editing and all of those things, and that ultimately those people would then be able to sort of take that experience and go and create their own television shows, and sort of branch out a bit. And so I would hope that this sort of boom of reality television, especially featuring black women, will do that. I mean, I think it remains to be seen, honestly, in a couple of years.
And as far as spreading out into other fields of television, like or other genres, more sitcoms that aren't like kitschy, like like Blackish, where it's just like it's kind of forced.
Well, Blackish just had like 4 episodes. I mean, I think, sorry, not to go off on a rant, but I mean, I think it sort of, doesn't it demonstrate how few black representations there are, that everybody's talking about Blackish and it's like barely been on. I mean, people were writing editorials about Blackish after the pilot. I mean, it was a pilot. Pilots are always horrible, but that's a whole other thing, right? I would think there would be room to sort of branch out and do other things. But I will say, I think more so than just getting the experience, I think that web-based media is like the new frontier, really, in terms of, in my opinion, in terms of Black representation. I mean, you look at something like Issa Rae's Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, right? And the way that her sort of doing that show off on her own has then created other opportunities for her. I don't think her thing with HBO worked out. I'm not sure what happened, but other opportunities sort of on more conventional, sort of television outlets. And so I actually think that that is sort of more productive in terms of what it's going to mean for African Americans sort of behind the camera.
Yeah, I think it's more of seeing women with layers. Like you, especially in reality television, you just see this. And if you see this in a different color, or pardon me, in a different, like a Caucasian woman, they're like, oh, blonde bimbo. But then we see it as a Black woman, it's just like, how are we supposed to interpret this? How my little niece is supposed to interpret this? It's very difficult for me to watch that sometimes.
Right. Well, the thing I will say, I think television in general deals in tropes. It does. I mean, that's just sort of the nature of television and film, for that matter. The other thing I'll say, though, is I think that we also have to be careful, sort of as a society, the labels that we put on those things. I mean, someone like Shonda Rhimes has gone out of her way to sort of avoid overly racializing her shows. I mean, she's pretty famous for sort of, doing colorblind casting and not really wanting to talk about her characters as Black characters, et cetera, et cetera. She can do all of that work, and some writer will still say that she's famous for doing like angry Black woman television, I think that has very little to do with the actual representations and everything to do with how that writer and some people just still choose insistently to see African American women. And so I think there's work to be done with the representations, but I do think there's also work to be done in how we read those representations, right? And that's, in my presentation, for me, it's easy to focus on the fights. I mean, it's sort of right there to look at some of the other things that happen, like the heartbreak, like women trying to figure out how do you deal with a man that you love but he doesn't treat you. I mean, that's the other stuff that happens there, but that's not the stuff I ever see getting written about or talked about.
I hate going last. So my question is for both Raquel and Marisol, whoever wants to answer it. How do you think social media, and I'm talking about like the two-way communication that's going on right now, it's changing the way that we consume media in terms of race?
I think it's great, actually. Social media is people are like paying attention. TV, the executives, at the end of the day, they are the one who decide who's going to be on TV. The writers they write, but the head of the whoever, the president of the channel, the executives, they are the one who's going to say, and usually they white and male, most of them. So, for example, when Sofia Vergara, she did this the whole thing with the statue like that at the Emmys, that was a huge. Twitter and Facebook, people went crazy. They were like, why is she doing that? So I think it's great, actually, and then after that she was quiet. I love her because I think she went to Hollywood. Oh, she was 30 something, and she made it. I don't know how, but she did. I'm sorry. And she says, she's very honest. She says, I'm not an actress, a famous actress. I'm very lucky to be here, and she understands that. And she's a businesswoman. She's very smart. She plays dumb. And there was an article about that, actually. So it was. I think it's amazing. Social media is pushing. It's right there. It was like I was watching the thing, and I was like on my face. I was like, oh no. She didn't. So at the end of the day, that's is bringing awareness of how people really are thinking. It's one of the biggest challenges that television executives have right now. They don't understand how it's so fast. They don't know how. You don't have no idea how many technologies they're trying to have to catch with it, to be ahead of time, but they cannot. It's so hard. It's just there.
Time. So I just want to add my thanks to our panelists for coming and talking to us, and to you all for being here and for your questions. So thank you.